I was 17 when my dad told me to pack my stuff and get out. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He said it like he was giving me advice, like I should be thankful he was setting me straight. His exact words? "You've embarrassed this family enough." And just like that, I was out. The reason? My sister Sophia wrecked our dad's car coming home from a party. She had been drinking. She panicked and begged me not to tell anyone. I thought maybe if I took the blame, if I showed I could protect her, maybe they'd finally see me as part of this family. So I said I was the one who drove the car without permission. I thought it would earn me respect. Instead, it earned me the door. Dad didn't even yell. He just pointed. Mom stood behind him with her arms crossed, eyes cold. Sophia sat on the couch, fake tears on her cheeks, letting me take the fall. I was handed a trash bag with my clothes, 12 crumpled dollars in my pocket, and a note that said, "You're on your own now, learn something from this." That night I ended up 2 blocks away at the bus shelter. The plastic seat dug into my back. The air smelled like cigarettes and rain. I tried to convince myself it was temporary. I told myself maybe in the morning, Dad would calm down, maybe Mom would realize Sophia had set me up. But when I went back to grab my backpack for school, there was another trash bag waiting on the porch. That was their message, "Don't come back." The hardest part wasn't the cold. It wasn't the hunger or the fear. It was the silence. No one checked in, no one texted. No one called. It was like I had never existed. I started working double shifts at a convenience store, sleeping in the stockroom on flattened cardboard boxes when the manager wasn't around. On Sunday nights, I'd walk past our old house, see the lights glowing in the kitchen, hear laughter through the walls. Once, I saw Sophia posing in front of her new phone, smiling wide while Mom held a cake. Dad had his arm around her shoulder. They never even glanced at the window. I stood on the sidewalk, invisible. That's when I realized something. I could burn myself out proving my loyalty and it would never be enough. They had already decided who I was, the spare, the one who didn't matter. And Sophia? She was their golden child. The girl who could wreck a car drunk and still get cake and candles. The night I finally broke was when I opened the trash bag they gave me. Half my clothes were ripped or stained. There was a sweater with a coffee spill on the sleeve, shoes with holes in the bottom. That's when it hit me, they didn't just throw me out. They wanted to remind me I was disposable. And you know what? That was the moment I swore I wouldn't let them write my story for me. If I had to start with $12 and a trash bag, fine. But one day, I'd make sure I had more than they ever imagined. Before I go on, let me ask you something. If you've ever felt like the spare in your own family, drop a comment below. I read everyone. And don't forget to subscribe. This channel is all about family revenge stories, and family drama that hit hard and stay with you. So there I was, 17, broke, sitting on a bus bench with nothing but a trash bag, and as much as I wanted to disappear, something inside me refused to. I wasn't done, not even close. My legs were stiff from the hard plastic bench, but I pushed myself up before the sun came up. I knew I couldn't sit there all day waiting for someone to save me. Nobody was coming. My stomach was growling, and the $12 in my pocket felt like it was already slipping through my fingers. I walked to a corner diner that opened early, hoping for a cheap breakfast. The waitress gave me a look when I counted out change for toast and coffee, but at least it was warm. I nursed that coffee for an hour, pretending to read the newspaper someone left behind, just to avoid going back outside. When I finally did, the air hit me like a wall. I wandered the strip mall, staring at the help wanted signs. Half the stores didn't bother to talk to me after I mentioned I was 17. Finally, the manager of a convenience store asked if I could work nights. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. That night I stocked shelves until my arms ached. By the time the last customer left, I was too exhausted to care about the hum of the fluorescent lights or the sticky soda spills on the floor. I found a spot in the stockroom behind boxes of chips and curled up on flattened cardboard. It wasn't comfortable, but it was out of the wind. Every time the manager walked through, I sat up straight and acted busy, heart pounding. Days blurred together. Work, sleep, repeat. I skipped school more than I showed up. Nobody called from the office, nobody asked where I was, not my parents, not even a teacher. It was like I had been erased. One night after closing, I walked past my old street. The house looked the same. Lights glowing in the kitchen, silhouettes moving around like nothing had changed. I stood in the dark, watching through the curtains. Sophia was at the table, laughing with her phone in one hand and a slice of cake in the other. Mom lit candles while Dad raised a glass. They didn't even notice me outside on the sidewalk. I was standing right there and might as well have been a ghost. I wanted to knock. Just once. To ask, why? But I stayed frozen. Because I knew, if I stepped onto that porch, they'd shut the door again. The truth hit me hard. My family wasn't going to come get me. They weren't going to apologize. They had already moved on, happy without me. At the store, I learned to survive on leftover sandwiches from the clearance shelf and instant noodles I hid in my backpack. I washed up in the bathroom sink, scrubbing my face with paper towels. My hands were always cracked from the cold, but I kept working. Every dollar felt like armor. Every paycheck was proof I could keep myself alive even if no one cared. One Friday, Sophia walked in. She tossed a soda on the counter and didn't even look at me at first. When she did, her smirk was the same as the night she let me take the fall for her crash. She slid a $20 bill across the counter, like she was doing me a favor. "Keep the change," she said. I wanted to throw it back at her. Instead, I put it in the till and stared at her nails, perfectly painted, her new phone shining in her hand. She walked out without another word. That was the night I realized how different our lives were going to be. She had everything handed to her. I had nothing but work and grit. And no matter how unfair it felt, I wasn't going to let her win. The hardest part came on holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve. Customers came in buying groceries for family dinners. I stocked turkeys and candy canes, watching people argue over cranberry sauce and laugh about ugly sweaters. Then I'd go back to the stockroom and eat a microwave burrito by myself. The silence wasn't just outside. It got into my head. The quiet nights lying on cardboard, staring at the ceiling, were the worst. I kept thinking about every time Sophia whispered something and Mom believed her, every time Dad called her champ and barely looked at me, and now, the silence was louder than their words ever were. But the longer it went on, the more something changed in me. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping for a knock on the door, or a phone call, or even a card. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I stopped looking at the house when I walked by. I was done. I wasn't going to be their spare. I wasn't going to be their ghost. If they didn't want me, fine. I'd learn how to want myself. So I kept showing up. Night after night. Shifts blurred into months, and slowly, my paycheck stopped being survival and started being opportunity. A kid at the counter told me about community college classes, and for the first time, I thought about more than just making it to the next day. What I didn't know then was that the choices I made in those nights, the cardboard beds, the silence, the bitterness would set me up for the one path that would change everything. The idea first came to me when I was sweeping the store floor one night, listening to two regulars talk about their kids in ROTC. One of them mentioned scholarships, guaranteed housing, a chance to build a career. I paused with the broom in my hands, thinking about how $12 in a trash bag had been my scholarship. The next morning, I walked into the community college office and asked about ROTC. The woman behind the desk gave me a brochure and said, "If you can commit, this program can open doors for you." She had no idea how badly I needed a door. Signing up wasn't simple. I had to scrape together documents I didn't even know I still had: birth certificate, transcripts, medical forms. I didn't dare call home for any of it. Instead, I went back to my old high school and begged the office for copies. The secretary looked at me like she was seeing a ghost, then handed over my records with a sigh. That was the first time I realized how invisible I had become to everyone except myself. When training started, it hit me hard. Early mornings, push-ups until my arms shook, running until my lungs burned. My body wanted to quit, but my pride wouldn't let me. For the first time in years, there were people around me who didn't care about Sophia, or who my parents were, or what they thought of me. They just cared if I could keep up. The drill sergeant barked orders like he was allergic to silence. "You're slower than my grandma," he shouted as I struggled through a mile run. I clenched my teeth and kept moving. Every step felt like proof that I wasn't the spare they said I was. I was here, and I was not quitting. One day during formation, I collapsed. My legs gave out, and I face-planted in the dirt. The world spun, and I braced for laughter, maybe even for someone to call me weak. Instead, the cadet next to me grabbed my arm and hauled me back up. "Not today," he said, steadying me. That moment stuck. In my family, weakness was blood in the water. Here, it was a challenge everyone fought together. The structure of military life was brutal, but it gave me something I'd never had: rules that made sense. If you worked, you got results. If you pushed, you got stronger. There was no Sophia to undercut me, no parents to believe her lies. Just me, my sweat, and the next obstacle. I started excelling in logistics training. Numbers, planning, figuring out how to get supplies from point A to point B, it all clicked. The instructors noticed. They told me I had a knack for seeing problems before they happened. That was the first time an adult looked me in the eye and said, "You're good at this." Not lazy, not problem, not spare. Good. The paychecks from my part-time job went straight into tuition and gear. I bought used textbooks, second-hand boots, whatever I needed to stay in the game. Nights were still long, but the difference was clear. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. Meanwhile, word got back to me through a cousin that Sophia had her big wedding. A country club, champagne towers, Dad walking her down the aisle like she was royalty. I saw the photos online: her white dress, his proud smile. Not one mention of me. Not even an invitation. And honestly, I was glad. Because while they were spending thousands on a single night, I was investing in the rest of my life. The first time I wore my uniform, I caught my reflection in a cracked mirror at the dorm. I barely recognized myself. The kid in ripped sweaters and busted shoes was gone. In her place was someone standing straighter, stronger, with a purpose no one could take away. During field exercises, I learned what it felt like to be relied on. We were supposed to move supplies across rough terrain, and everyone looked to me when the plans started falling apart. I sketched out a new route in the dirt with a stick, quick and simple, and it worked. The relief on their faces was better than any praise. For once, I wasn't the outsider. I was the one who saved the mission. Those nights, lying on a thin mattress in the barracks, I thought about how far I had come from that bus shelter. I still had scars, but they weren't the kind you hide. They were the kind you use. I realized then that my family had given me a gift without meaning to. They taught me how to live without them, and that meant I was free to build a life they couldn't touch. So I pushed harder. I ran farther. I studied longer. Every ounce of discipline I poured in felt like one more nail in the coffin of the story they'd written for me. They had said I wasn't built for success. But every step I took in uniform was proof they were wrong. The mornings came before the Sunday, the alarm cut through the barracks like a siren, and within seconds, boots were hitting the floor. My body ached in ways I didn't know were possible, but there was no room for excuses. You either moved, or you were left behind. I pushed through endless drills, push-ups until my arms shook, ruck marches with packs heavier than me, obstacle courses designed to break every weakness. At first, I thought I'd never survive. But each day I got a little faster, a little sharper. The blisters on my feet turned to calluses. The breathless gasps turned into steady rhythm. Pain became a signal that I was getting stronger. There was one run in particular that nearly broke me. A 5-mile course under the summer sun, sweat blinding my eyes. Halfway through, my chest burned, and my legs felt like cement. The sergeant shouted, "If you can't finish, why are you here?" That lit a fire I didn't know I had. I forced my legs forward, step after step, refusing to be the one who quit. By the time I crossed the line, I thought I might collapse. But instead of pity, I saw nods. Silent respect. That meant more than any words. I wasn't just learning discipline, I was learning what it felt like to rely on myself completely. No family safety net, no Sophia whispering lies to get me kicked out. Just me, and the standard that had to be met. In a strange way, it was freeing. At night, lying in the bunk, I thought about Sophia's world. I'd seen photos of her in a designer dress, posing with a brand new car Dad bought her after she turned 21. She had her nails done, vacations posted online, and a crowd of people ready to believe every word she said. Meanwhile, I was scrubbing mud out of my boots and rolling out of bed before dawn. And yet, for the first time, I didn't envy her. She had comfort, but no backbone. I had nothing, but I was building one. The training wasn't just physical. In logistics school, I dove into the details, routes, supply lines, timing, backup plans. It was like solving a giant puzzle with lives on the line. Some cadets complained it was boring. To me, it was purpose. It was control. I couldn't fix the family I came from, but I could make sure a shipment of food and water reached a unit on time. That mattered. One assignment tested me more than any exam. We were tasked with setting up supply drops in a mock disaster zone. Halfway through, our plan collapsed. The routes we picked were blocked, and everyone panicked. I felt that familiar sinking feeling, the same one I had when Sophia lied and I knew my parents wouldn't believe me. Except this time, no one was here to lie. It was just a problem that needed solving. I grabbed a stick, crouched in the dirt, and redrew the map. Shorter routes, better drop points, faster resupply. The others followed my lead. When it worked, the instructor called it initiative. I called it survival. It wasn't lost on me that the discipline I was learning here was everything I'd begged for as a kid: fairness, accountability, recognition for effort. My parents said I had no ambition. My sister called me useless. But here, effort was currency, and I was cashing in. Still, not everything was triumph. There were nights I sat on the edge of my bunk, staring at the floor, too tired to move. Days when my muscles screamed and I wondered if I was just fooling myself. But I kept showing up, because showing up was the one thing I could always control. Graduation from training was the first time I stood in uniform in front of a crowd that actually clapped for me, not out of obligation, not out of pretense, but because I'd earned it. The ceremony wasn't flashy, no champagne, no expensive dresses, just a field, a stage, and a line of cadets who'd survived the same hell I had. But when I marched across that stage, it was the proudest moment of my life. I didn't have family in the audience, no one came with flowers or cameras. But when my name was called and my commanding officer shook my hand, I felt something better than their applause. I felt like I had finally proven to myself that I wasn't the spare. The picture they handed me that day, a simple certificate, a handshake frozen in time, wasn't framed in gold, but I pinned it above my bunk like it was worth millions. Because to me, it was. From then on, every challenge felt different. I wasn't dragging the weight of their words anymore. I was running, climbing, lifting under my own strength, with my own goals in front of me, and the further I went, the smaller their voices became. When people ask me why I stayed in, why I pushed through when I could have quit, I always think back to that night in the bus shelter. The silence. The trash bag. The note that told me to learn something. I did. I learned that I could rebuild myself from nothing. And that lesson was worth more than anything they ever gave me. The first time I was sent on a real mission, it wasn't combat, it was disaster relief in Florida after a hurricane ripped through the coast. The place looked like a war zone anyway. Roofs peeled off houses, streets flooded, trees snapped in half. Families were stranded, waiting for help that felt like it would never come. That's where we came in. I was part of the logistics team assigned to move supplies, food, water, medical kits into neighborhoods cut off by the flooding. It sounded straightforward on paper. On the ground, it was chaos. Roads were blocked by downed power lines, bridges were washed out, and people were desperate. The first convoy I rode with crawled through knee-deep water, the Humvees stalling every few minutes. At one point, we stopped in front of a road completely underwater. The officer in charge cursed under his breath and started talking about turning back. That didn't sit right with me. We had a truck full of bottled water and kids standing on rooftops waving for help. "Sir, what if we cut through County Road 7, I said, pointing at the map. "It's higher ground, the GPS won't show it, but locals said it's clear." He looked at me like I had grown another head, but then he sighed. "Fine. You lead it." We rerouted, and it worked. Within an hour, we were handing out supplies in a neighborhood that hadn't seen help in days. I'll never forget the look on one mom's face when I passed her a case of formula. She whispered, "Thank you," like I'd just given her the world. That was the moment I understood what my job meant. The days blurred into 12-hour shifts. We hauled food into shelters, dragged tarps across destroyed roofs, and kept generators running. Every small success felt huge. I wasn't the spare anymore. I was the one people depended on. The hardest moment came during a night run. A second storm cell rolled in, lightning cracking across the sky, rain hammering down so hard it felt like needles. We were moving another convoy of supplies when the lead vehicle skidded and nearly flipped in the water. Radios went wild with shouting. The officer hesitated, trying to figure out whether to pull back. I didn't. I jumped out, waded into the water, and helped rig a tow to pull the truck straight. My boots filled instantly, the current dragging at my legs, but we got it done. When the convoy started moving again, the officer yelled at me for breaking protocol. I just nodded and kept walking. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't there for his approval, I was there to get the job done. By the time we rotated out, I was exhausted but sharper than I'd ever been. The mission report singled me out for initiative under pressure. For me, it wasn't about praise. It was about finally feeling like I'd done something that mattered. Back in the barracks, I laid out the small stack of photos people had taken during the operation. Trucks splashing through floodwater. Kids holding water bottles like trophies. My uniform soaked, face streaked with mud, but smiling anyway. That smile wasn't for the camera. It was for me. Meanwhile, I heard through social media that Sophia was in Cancun with her friends, sun hats, cocktails, the whole thing. She looked carefree, like the world existed just to entertain her. I didn't feel jealous anymore. I felt distant. Her life and mine weren't even on the same planet. During the next briefing, the commander said, "This is the kind of work that shows who you are. It's not the medals, it's not the headlines. It's the people who go home because of what you did." I sat straighter in my chair. For once, those words felt like they were meant for me. I started thinking bigger. If I could plan supply lines under floodwater and storm clouds, what else could I handle? Every assignment became another chance to prove that the girl with $12 and a trash bag could build a life that mattered. One night, after weeks of deployment, I walked out to the edge of the base and looked up at the sky. It was quiet, no storms, no chaos, just me in uniform breathing air that felt earned. I thought about my parents and Sophia, about the night they shut the door on me. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt unstoppable. And the truth was, I hadn't just survived the mission, I had thrived in it. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what life threw at me. I was the one steering. The hurricane mission changed everything. Word spread fast inside the unit about the girl who rerouted a convoy and pulled a truck out of floodwater. I didn't think much of it at the time, I was just doing what needed to be done, but apparently that's the kind of thing commanders notice. A few months later, I was called into the office. My commanding officer handed me a paper with my name on it and said, "Congratulations, you're being promoted, you've earned it." For a second, I just stared at the page. Promotions weren't supposed to come this quickly, my throat tightened as I took it from him. I'd been called worthless, lazy, and disposable for so long that part of me didn't believe what I was reading. The ceremony was small compared to what civilians might picture. No grand stage or confetti. Just a formation, a roll call, and a medal pinned on my uniform. But to me, it felt bigger than any wedding Sophia could plan or any birthday dinner I'd never been invited to. This wasn't a pity gift or a family obligation, this was recognition I had earned. Standing there in uniform, I thought back to that night at the bus shelter. The girl shivering under a streetlight with a trash bag and $12 would have laughed in disbelief if someone told her she'd one day stand in formation as an officer. The local news showed up, snapping photos and asking questions about young leaders in the military. My name ended up in the paper. A few weeks later, the Chamber of Commerce back home featured me in a spotlight campaign for young professionals. My face was suddenly plastered on a billboard off Route 9. It felt surreal to drive past it and see myself looking down with the words, "From service to strength." That was the first time I realized my family couldn't avoid me anymore. For years, they'd acted like I didn't exist. Now they couldn't pump gas or drive to the grocery store without seeing my face on a 20-foot sign. Sure enough, my phone started buzzing. A voicemail from my dad, stiff, formal, like he was reading off a script. Then my mom, trying to sound warm, saying she was proud of me. Cousins I hadn't heard from in a decade suddenly wanted to catch up. And of course, Sophia. Her message was short, "Nice billboard, you've got that big house near Raleigh, right? We should visit sometime." No congratulations, no apology, just entitlement wrapped in fake friendliness. I sat on my couch, staring at the screen. It was almost funny. When I slept on cardboard in a stockroom, no one called. When I missed birthdays and holidays, no one asked where I was. But the second my face went public, suddenly, I was worth something again. It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was clarity. They hadn't changed. They didn't miss me. They missed what I could give them. Access. Money. Shelter. And I wasn't about to let them rewrite history just because they wanted a room in my house. Still, I won't lie, hearing their voices after so many years did something to me. There was a sting, like part of me still wanted them to mean it. But then I remembered standing in formation, the metal catching the sun, strangers clapping for me because I had done the work. That was the only validation I needed. Recognition kept coming. More missions, more commendations. I was promoted again, this time to major. My unit trusted me with logistics others couldn't handle. Every time I signed off on a plan that worked, every time we completed a mission without losses, I felt that invisible weight of their words lifting. I started to realize something powerful. Success wasn't just survival anymore, it was my revenge. Every article, every award, every promotion, they were reminders that I had become everything they said I couldn't, and they had to watch it happen from the outside. When I visited the base commissary one afternoon, a younger soldier stopped me. He said, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thanks. You're the reason I didn't quit training. I saw you out there pushing past the rest of us, and I thought, if she can do it, so can I." That hit harder than any medal. For years, I'd been told I was a burden. Now, someone was saying I was their example. At night, I sometimes pulled out the crumpled note, "My parents left me, you're on your own now. Learn something from this." I kept it not as a wound, but as proof. They were right about one thing, I had learned something. I'd learned how to build a life without them. So when my phone buzzed again with another message from Sophia, I didn't answer. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there, proof that for the first time, I was the one deciding who had access to me. Recognition had finally replaced rejection, and I wasn't about to trade that for a single ounce of their fake approval. The billboard had barely been up a week when my phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't just voicemails from my parents or distant relatives, it was Sophia herself. A text, short and smug, like nothing had ever happened. "You've got that house near Raleigh, right? We should come stay for a while. It'll be fun, just like old times." I stared at the screen, and for a second, I thought maybe I was hallucinating. Old times? Did she mean the old times when she wrecked a car drunk and let me take the fall? Or the old times when she smirked from the couch while mom and dad shoved me out with a trash bag? Because those were the only old times I remembered. The message didn't stop there. A few minutes later, another text buzzed through. "It's a big place. You don't even need all that space. Family should stick together. Family should stick together." That was rich coming from her. I didn't answer. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I locked the phone instead. Over the next few days, the silence I had lived with for years turned into noise. My mom called again, leaving messages about how things were tough right now. My dad left one voicemail that sounded like it was meant for a business partner instead of his daughter. And Sophia? She doubled down. Pictures of her and her husband popped up on social media, followed by captions like, "Hard times show who your real family island." I almost laughed, she wasn't even subtle. But ignoring them didn't mean the old wounds didn't reopen. At night, I'd lie awake thinking about that porch, about the way the door slammed in my face, about the silence that followed. I remembered begging them to believe me, to hear me out, and getting nothing but crossed arms and cold stares. The thing is, success doesn't erase pain, it just gives you better armor. And as much as I wanted to brush off their sudden interest in my life, a part of me still burned. Not because I wanted them back, but because I knew exactly why they were here. They saw the uniform, they saw the house, they saw the medals. And for the first time, they saw value in me. Not love. Not family. Value. One evening after work, I walked through the halls of my home and stopped in the living room. The walls held framed photos of missions, certificates, moments I had fought tooth and nail to earn. For the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful. This was my space. My choice. My life. The thought of Sophia and my parents dragging their baggage into it made my skin crawl. The next morning, I opened my phone again. There were 3 more texts from Sophia. "We're in a rough spot, you know how it island. Just until we get back on our feet. Then, it would mean a lot to Mom and Dad if you stepped up. And finally, don't be selfish." Selfish. That word made my jaw clench. Selfish was what they called me when I wanted to go to culinary school. Selfish was what they called me when I wanted to keep the truth about Sophia's car crash from blowing up the family. And now, selfish was what they called me because I wasn't opening the door wide enough for them to walk back into my life like nothing had happened. I thought about typing out a reply. Something sharp, something final. But then I put the phone down again. The truth was, no response was the loudest response. Later that week, I sat in my office going over logistics plans when the phone buzzed again. This time it was from my Aunt Janice. She hadn't spoken to me in over a decade, but suddenly, she was sending a Facebook message. "It would really mean a lot to the family if you stepped up right now." I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Where were these people when I was eating clearance sandwiches and sleeping on cardboard? Where were they when I walked past my parents' glowing windows, invisible on the sidewalk? That's when it hit me, they weren't reaching out because they cared. They were reaching out because they were desperate. And desperation makes people bold enough to rewrite history. But history wasn't theirs to rewrite anymore. It was mine. I stood up, stretched my arms, and looked out the window at the driveway where my car was parked. The same driveway Sophia wanted to waltz into like she owned a piece of it. The thought made me laugh again, but this time with less bitterness. Because deep down, I knew something that they didn't. The door was already closed, and it wasn't opening again. I pulled into my driveway one Saturday and froze. Parked across the street was a silver Honda Civic. I knew too well the same one my parents had driven for years. For a second, I considered circling the block, pretending I hadn't seen it. But there they were, sitting on my porch like they had every right to be there. My mom stood up holding a Tupperware container, smiling like this was just some friendly drop-in. "Oh my God, you look so good," she said, arms opening for a hug. I didn't move. "Why are you here?" My voice was steady, but my stomach twisted. She hesitated, then plastered on a smile. "We thought maybe we could catch up. It's been so long." Behind her, my dad stayed seated, flipping through his phone like he was too important to make eye contact. Sophia leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed, that same smug smirk plastered on her face. I leaned against the doorframe and raised an eyebrow. "Is Nathan okay?" That did it. My mom's expression flickered, and she glanced at Sophia. "Well, things have been rough. He and Alyssa lost their apartment. They fell behind on rent, and with the baby on the way." She trailed off, letting the sentence hang in the air. Then Sophia stepped in, rolling her eyes like this was all beneath her. "Look, you've got this big place, you don't even use all the rooms, just let us stay for a little while until things settle down, it's not a big deal." Mayaf clenched. "Not a big deal?" When I was 17, you sat there while they kicked me out with $12 and a trash bag. You remember that? You remember watching me walk out that door? Sophia shifted, but the smirk didn't fade. That was years ago. You're clearly fine now, maybe it was the push you needed. My dad finally looked up from his phone. Jessica, don't make this harder than it has to be. Family takes care of each other. That line nearly made me laugh out loud. Family takes care of each other? Where was that philosophy when I was sleeping in a stockroom, washing up in a gas station sink? Where was it when my phone stayed silent on every birthday, every holiday? I took a deep breath. You weren't protecting family back then, you were protecting Sophia. Because it was easier to believe her lies than admit she was the problem. For the first time, my mom's face cracked, guilt flickered, quickly covered with defensiveness. It was complicated. We did what we thought was right. No, I cut in. You did what was convenient, and now that your perfect daughter's choices caught up with her, you want me to clean up the mess. Again. Sophia's smirk dropped, replaced by a glare sharp enough to cut glass. You think you're better than us now? Because you wear a uniform and got your face on a billboard? At the end of the day, you're still that scared little girl who cried when Dad told her the truth. Me. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. No, Sophia. I'm the woman who survived without you. And I'm the one standing here in my own home, while you're begging on my porch. Her face flushed red. My mom jumped in before she could spit back. Jessica, please. Just for a few months. Until they get back on their feet. I shook my head. This house doesn't have a spare room, not for you, not for Dad, not for Sophia, not for anyone who abandoned me. Hedda. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of a neighbor's dog barking in the distance. My dad stood, his jaw tight, but he didn't argue. My mom's eyes filled with something close to shame, but she still clutched that Tupperware like an apology could be baked into banana bread. Sophia finally snapped. You're being selfish. That word again. Always that word. I stared right at her. No. I'm just done being useful to people who only remember I exist when they need something. 1. I opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it firmly. No slamming, no yelling, just final. Inside, I leaned against the wall, heart racing. I half expected them to knock again, to shout through the door, to push until I caved. But they didn't. The porch went quiet. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't the powerless teenager they had shoved out into the cold. I had the control now. And they knew it. That night, the house felt heavier than usual. I tried to distract myself with paperwork, but the sound of my mother's voice on the porch and Sophia's glare kept replaying in my head. It was like opening a door I'd nailed shut years ago. I sat down at my desk and pulled out the same notebook I'd been scribbling in since training days. Normally, it was filled with mission notes and to-do lists. That night, it became a dumping ground for memories I thought I'd buried. The first thing I wrote was about Sophia's games. I remembered the way she used to corner me in the hallway when no one was around, whispering threats just quiet enough that my parents never heard. Don't bother telling them, they'll believe me anyway. And she was right. They always did. I wrote about the time she shoved me and then scratched her own arm before running to Mom crying that I had attacked her. Mom didn't ask questions, she just grounded me for a week. I sat on my bed back then, stunned at how easy it was for Sophia to manufacture the narrative. And then there was the car accident. I could still see her face that night, streaked with mascara, begging me to take the blame. You owe me, she said, like my existence was a debt she collected interest on. I thought if I protected her, maybe she'd finally treat me like a sister. Instead, she watched from the couch while Dad told me to pack. As I wrote, the pen pressed so hard into the paper it almost tore through. My hand shook, but I didn't stop. The words poured out like poison, finally draining. When I looked up, hours had passed. The house was dark except for the lamp on my desk. I sat back and stared at what I'd written. It wasn't just a list of grievances, it was a record of survival. But memories have a way of sneaking into quiet moments. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shut them off. Every birthday candle I never blew out. Every Christmas morning I spent alone while they pretended I didn't exist. Every time I heard the word spare in my dad's flat, dismissive tone. The silence had been brutal back then, now it came back, curling around me like smoke. I turned onto my side and stared at the framed certificate on my nightstand, the promotion that had felt like redemption. But even that couldn't drown out the sting of their words echoing in my head. Recognition didn't erase the damage. It just gave me new armor to wear over the scars. The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat outside on the porch, the same porch where my mother had begged for a room hours earlier. The air was cool, the yard quiet. I gripped the mug and forced myself to breathe. I reminded myself that I wasn't that kid anymore. I wasn't at their mercy. I wasn't invisible. Still, my chest felt tight. Because as much as I wanted to close that chapter, it was clear it had never really been closed. Seeing them, hearing them, reopened everything. By noon I was back at my desk, notebook open again. This time, I didn't write about the betrayals, I wrote about what I had done since. The first paycheck I spent on textbooks. The night I slept in the barracks instead of a stockroom. The moment I stood in formation with my name called for recognition. Page by page, I balanced the ledger. For every memory of being thrown away, I wrote one about building myself back up. It didn't erase the past, but it shifted the weight. At one point, I laughed to myself. Sophia wanted me to be selfish? Maybe I finally was. Because I had learned that choosing myself over them wasn't selfish, it was survival. And survival had turned into success. That night, as the house settled into silence again, I closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer. The memories would never vanish, but they no longer owned me. They were ink on paper, not chains on my neck. I stretched out on the couch, staring at the ceiling, and felt something shift. For years I had avoided thinking about the betrayal because it hurt too much. But maybe reopening the wound was the only way to clean it out. The past was ugly, the silence was cruel. But I was still here, and that, in itself, was louder than anything they had ever said. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway through reviewing transport schedules when my phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was calm but heavy. My grandmother, Margaret Turner, had passed away. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the neat rows of numbers on my screen. She was the only one who had ever reached out in quiet ways. Birthday cards slipped into the mail, a $20 bill tucked inside with a note that read, "I'm proud of you." Now she was gone, and with her went the last person in my family who had never treated me like a mistake. When I arrived at her house, it still smelled like lavender and old books. On the dining table sat a wooden box with my name written on an envelope taped to the top. The handwriting was hers, slanted, neat, careful. My chest tightened before I even touched it. I carried the box to the living room and sat in her favorite chair. The envelope trembled in my hands as I opened it. Her letter was short, but every word landed hard. To my granddaughter they never saw. You were never the spare, you were always the strongest. I kept the truth for you, so you would never doubt yourself again. Everything inside this box belongs to you. I lifted the lid, and inside were stacks of journals, each page yellowed with age. She had been documenting everything for years, notes about my birthdays ignored, about Sophia staging fights and blaming me, about my mother calling me a burden when she thought no one was listening. It was all there, written in her steady hand. And then, at the bottom, a set of legal documents, a notarized deed transfer. She had signed over her house and property to me months before she died. My throat closed up as I held the papers, realizing she had done this deliberately, making sure it couldn't be undone. For a long time, I just sat in the chair, staring at the journals spread across my lap. She hadn't just left me proof, she had left me protection. She had rewritten the story my parents and Sophia had tried to control for years. That night, I walked through her garden. Rows of rosemary, marigolds, and roses she had planted with her own hands swayed in the breeze. She used to call it her living prayer. I remembered kneeling in the dirt beside her one summer when I was 13, pressing seeds into the soil while she whispered, "Every spring is a chance to start over." Back then, I didn't understand. Now, standing there with her words in my pocket, I finally did. Inside, I read more of the journals. She hadn't spared details. She described the day I was kicked out, how Sophia bragged afterward to friends about how easy it had been to get rid of me. She wrote about my mom's lies at church, about how my dad repeated them like gospel. Reading it was like being punched and hugged at the same time. Painful to relive, but affirming to know I hadn't imagined it. For years, I'd carried doubts. Maybe I really had deserved it. Maybe I had been too loud, too lazy, too difficult, but my grandmother's words erased that doubt. She had seen everything. She had recorded it. And she had left it to me, deliberately, so no one could twist the truth again. I sat at her desk with the journals piled high and the deed papers spread out. The silence of the house was different from the silence I'd known before. This wasn't neglect, it was peace. It was her final gift. At one point, I laughed quietly to myself. Sophia had begged me for a spare room. Now, the truth was, I had more than a room. I had a home. Not just any home, her home. The one place that had always felt safe, and now it was legally mine. The weight of that realization was overwhelming. I thought about the night I stood outside my parents' window watching them celebrate without me. About the nights on cardboard in a stockroom. About the silence. And then I thought about my grandmother writing in her journals, one entry at a time, making sure my story wasn't erased. I ran my hand over the wooden box. "Thank you," I whispered, even though she wasn't there to hear it. Later, as I locked up the house, I paused at the door. For the first time, I felt something close to closure. Not the kind that comes from an apology, they'd never give me that, but from finally holding the truth in my own hands. The garden lights flickered on, illuminating the roses swaying gently in the breeze. She had asked me once to promise I'd plant something new every spring. And I knew I would. Because this house, her house, was mine now. And so was the legacy she left me. The box of journals didn't sit quietly on a shelf. I couldn't leave it there, not when every page inside was a record of the truth I had been denied for years. My grandmother hadn't written them for herself, she had written them for me, and now I had to decide what to do with them. I started with a draft email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I thought about who needed to see it. Aunts, uncles, cousins, every relative who had swallowed the story that I was rebellious, unstable, or worse. People who whispered about me at family gatherings, convinced I was the screw-up who ran away. They deserved to know what really happened. The subject line was simple. The truth about Jessica. I typed. For years, you've been told lies about me. You've heard that I ran away, that I was troubled, that I turned my back on family. None of that is true. Here's what really happened. Then I attached the evidence. Photos of the journals, pages where my grandmother had documented Sophia staging fights, Mom calling me a mistake, Dad ignoring every plea. And finally, the smoking gun. A screenshot of a text Sophia had sent years ago bragging about how easy it had been to get rid of me. When I hit send, my chest felt tight, like I had just jumped out of a plane. I muted the family group chat years ago, but I unmuted it now. My phone buzzed within minutes. Aunt Marie, is this real? I had no idea. Uncle Leo, your parents told us you ran off on drugs. I can't believe this. Cousin Denise, I always wondered why you disappeared, I'm so sorry. One by one, the messages poured in. Shock. Sympathy. Some awkward half-apologies that were more about easing their guilt than healing my pain. But I didn't care. I hadn't written for pity. I'd written for the truth. And finally, it was out. Then came the one message I didn't expect. Alyssa, my brother, Nathan's wife. Her text was shaky, filled with typos. I had no idea. He told me you were violent, unstable, that your grandmother took you in after you assaulted your mom. I feel sick. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. She messaged again before I could respond. I left him last night. I read your email out loud and he laughed, then screamed, then tried to delete it from my phone. I can't do it anymore. I'm 7 months pregnant and I won't raise a child in lies. I sat back, stunned. My words hadn't just cracked the family's image of me, they'd cracked his marriage. Nathan, the golden boy, the one they worshipped, had finally shown his real face, and Alyssa wasn't willing to look away. I typed back carefully. You did the right thing. You and your baby deserve better. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in knowing my brother's family was falling apart, but there was clarity. For once, the truth had consequences, and those consequences weren't mine to carry. 3 days later, I was leaving my favorite coffee shop when I heard someone call my name. I turned, and there he was, Nathan. He looked like a ghost of the kid my parents had idolized. Hair unwashed, eyes sunken, still wearing the same varsity jacket from high school like he was clinging to the last time anyone thought he was important. You think you're better than me now? He sneered, stepping closer. I didn't answer. You always played the victim. Even now. What? You want everyone to feel sorry for you? You think anyone actually cares about your sob story? His breath reeked of cheap beer. I locked eyes with him. You lied, I said quietly. He laughed, sharp and bitter. So what? You survived, didn't you? You've got your house, your little medals, your billboard, so quit crying. There were 100 things I wanted to scream. Every night I cried myself to sleep. Every birthday alone. Every time I doubted my worth because of him. But I knew that's what he wanted, a scene. A chance to paint me as unhinged. So I stepped around him, opened my car door, and said just one thing: you lied, I thrived, and now you have to live with that. His face twisted, but I didn't stay to watch. I drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot, shrinking into the shadow of his own lies. That night, I had dinner with a few friends from my unit. They laughed, traded stories, teased each other the way soldiers do. I found myself smiling in a way I hadn't in days. When I got home, I pulled out my grandmother's journals again, running my hand over the cover. The truth was out now. The family could whisper all they wanted, but the record stood. They couldn't erase me anymore. And that, more than anything, felt like justice. The fallout from my email didn't stop with angry texts and shocked relatives. The real hit came when Sophia's husband, Daniel, found out what she'd done. I heard about it first through Alyssa, my brother's wife. She called me late one evening, her voice quiet, almost apologetic. Jessica, I thought you should know. Daniel saw everything. The journals, the messages, the screenshots. He confronted Sophia, and it wasn't pretty. It didn't surprise me. Daniel always seemed like the type who played along with Sophia's perfect image because it was easier than questioning it. He never looked me in the eye at family gatherings, probably because she'd already fed him her version of the story, but now the truth was laid out in black and white. From what Alyssa told me, Daniel read through every word, every line my grandmother had written, every message Sophia had sent bragging about me being easy to get rid of. When he put the papers down, he didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just looked at her and said, so it was all a lie. Sophia tried to spin it, of course. She said the journals were biased, that our grandmother always had it out for her, that I was manipulating everyone. But the more she talked, the clearer it became. She had no defense. The lies were too many, too obvious, too ugly. Daniel packed a bag that night. She begged him to stay, promised it wasn't what it looked like, swore she had only been protecting the family. But he didn't listen. He walked out the door and didn't look back. For the first time in her life, Sophia was left standing alone. No adoring husband, no parents rushing to shield her. Just silence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Because the truth is, watching a marriage collapse isn't satisfying, it's sad. But I couldn't ignore the irony. For years, Sophia had thrived on taking things from me: attention, trust, even my place in the family, and now, the truth had taken something from her that she couldn't get back. A week later, I ran into her by accident at the grocery store. She looked nothing like the polished, perfect sister I remembered. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who hadn't slept in days. She spotted me in the aisle and froze. "Jessica," she said, her voice flat. I nodded, keeping my hands on the cart. Sophia. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she whispered, almost too low to hear, "He left." I didn't answer. What was there to say? She searched my face for something: sympathy, forgiveness, maybe even validation. But all I gave her was silence. She had taught me that silence years ago. Now it was my turn. She gripped the edge of her cart. "This is your fault." I raised an eyebrow. My fault? Or the fault of the lies you told that finally caught up with you? Her face twisted. She wanted to fight, to argue, to make me the villain. But she couldn't. Not anymore. She turned away first, muttering something under her breath as she walked off. I stood there for a while, my hands tight on the handle of the cart. For years, I had dreamed of moments like this, my sister finally facing consequences. And now that it was here, it didn't feel like triumph. It just felt inevitable. When I got home, I sat on the porch with a glass of water, staring out at the yard. The house was quiet, peaceful, mine. I thought about Daniel, about how his silence in the face of truth had said more than any argument ever could. And I thought about Sophia, stripped of her perfect image, forced to face herself without a shield. The truth doesn't always give you a clean victory. It doesn't erase the damage or undo the years. But sometimes, it takes away the illusions. And without her illusions, Sophia had nothing left. That was the night I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about shouting the loudest or proving them wrong in some dramatic scene. Revenge was letting the truth do the work for me. And the truth had already started dismantling the world Sophia had built on lies. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For once, I didn't feel the weight of proving myself. The proof was out there. Everyone had seen it. And the fallout was speaking louder than I ever could. The knock came late on a Sunday evening. I almost didn't answer it, but something in me knew who it was before I even reached the door. When I opened it, Sophia stood there, arms crossed, her face pale and tight with anger. "You ruined everything," she spat before I could even say hello. I leaned against the frame, calm. "Good evening to you too." Her voice shook, half from rage and half from desperation. "You've destroyed this family. Do you have any idea what you've done? Mom won't stop crying, Dad barely leaves his chair, Daniel is gone, and Nathan," she broke off, catching herself, but her meaning was clear. "Nathan was spiraling too." I folded my arms. "Funny. When you kicked me out at 17 with a trash bag and $12, I don't remember you worrying about destroying the family. Back then, it was just easier to throw me away." Sophia flinched. For a second, the mask slipped, but she pulled it back quickly. "That was different." "No," I said flatly, "it wasn't. You lied. You manipulated. And everyone else let you get away with it because you were the golden one. You didn't care what it cost me." Her lips trembled, and she fired back. "I was a kid. I didn't know better." "You knew enough," I replied. My voice was steady, sharper now. "You knew how to get me in trouble, you knew how to take what you wanted, and you knew they'd believe you over me, every time. Don't stand here and act like you didn't understand what you were doing." She glared at me, but for once, she didn't have a comeback ready. Instead, she let the silence hang between us before whispering, "I was supposed to be the one who made them proud. Not you." And there it was, the truth, laid bare. I shook my head slowly. "You weren't competing with me, Sophia, you were competing with your own shadow. You wanted so badly to be perfect that you turned me into the villain to make yourself shine brighter. But guess what? That shine was never real." Her eyes glossed with tears, she refused to let fall. She jabbed a finger at me. "You think you're better than me just because you wore a uniform, just because you got a house and some medals?" I didn't move. "No. I don't think I'm better. I just know I survived without all the lies propping me up. I built something on my own. Can you say the same?" Her chest heaved, and for a moment, I thought she might lunge at me. Instead, she dropped her hand and said bitterly, "You'll regret this. One day, you'll realize you can't live without family." I let out a humorless laugh. I already did live without family, Sophia, for 15 years. And it turns out, I'm better off that way. Her shoulders slumped like the weight of the truth had finally landed. She looked smaller somehow, deflated, like all the bravado had drained out of her. You'll never understand, she muttered, stepping back from the porch. Maybe not, I said quietly. But I understand this much, I'm not the one who destroyed the family. You are. You just don't want to face it. She froze, her face twisting like the words had cut deeper than she expected. Then, without another word, she turned and walked down the driveway. The sound of her heels on the pavement faded into the night, leaving the air heavy but clean. I closed the door gently. My hands were steady, my breath even. For years, I had rehearsed what I would say to her if I ever had the chance. But when it came down to it, the truth spoke for itself. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to prove anything. For the first time, Sophia had to sit with her own reflection. And I knew it would haunt her more than anything I could ever do. Later that night, I sat in the living room with my grandmother's journals open on the table. I read her careful handwriting again, the way she had recorded everything not to punish, but to preserve the truth. She must have known this moment would come. She must have known that one day, Sophia would face me with all her fury, and I would need more than anger to respond. I ran my hand over the last page of the journal and whispered to the empty room, I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of abandonment anymore. It was the silence of peace, of finally knowing the past didn't own me. And that silence, I realized, was the loudest victory of all. The morning air was crisp when I walked into the garden with a small potted rose bush in my hands. White petals, still closed, waited for the sun to coax them open. My grandmother had asked me to promise that I'd plant something new every spring. This year, it would be this rose. I knelt down in the soil she once worked with her own gloves, now faded and still hanging by the fence. The ground was firm but forgiving. As I dug the hole, I thought about everything that had led me here: the trash bag, the bus stop, the cardboard nights, the uniform that became my lifeline, the house they said I'd never deserve. Every handful of dirt felt like I was burying the weight of their lies. When the roots touched the earth, I paused. For years, I believed being the spare meant I was disposable. But standing there, knees pressed to the ground, I realized the truth. A spare part isn't worthless. Sometimes it's the one piece that keeps everything running when the main part fails, and I had done exactly that. I pressed the soil down firmly, my palms covered in dirt, then I stood, brushing my hands against my jeans, and looked at the bush in place. A single plant, fragile but strong, ready to bloom in its own time. I thought back to Sophia's last words on my porch, her anger, her desperation. She claimed I destroyed the family. But families don't break because of truth, they break because of lies. And hers had finally collapsed under the weight of years spent building castles on sand. Inside the house, my grandmother's journals rested on the shelf in plain view. I left them there deliberately. Not hidden away, not locked up, but right where I could see them. A reminder of what I endured, and more importantly, what I overcame. Later that afternoon, a neighbor stopped by, curious about the new plant. I smiled, and told her it was a white rose, a symbol of new beginnings. She nodded politely, probably unaware of how much weight those words carried for me, but I didn't need her to understand. The meaning was mine alone. As the sun dipped lower, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea. For once, the silence didn't ache. It felt earned. The kind of silence that comes when you've told your story and no longer care who believes it. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the viral post I had shared weeks ago, the letter I wrote back to my parents when they tried to move into my grandmother's house. Thousands of strangers had read it, commented on it, shared their own stories. People from all over had written, I was the spare too, or, this happened to me, and I thought I was alone. That was the real surprise. My story wasn't just mine, it belonged to everyone who had ever been cast aside, overlooked, or used until they weren't needed. And seeing those comments, hearing those voices, made me realize the power of finally speaking out. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. And I wasn't carrying their shame on my back. They were the ones who had to live with the fallout of their choices. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the garden. The white rose caught the last bit of sunlight, glowing faintly in the dusk. I smiled, because it wasn't just a plant, it was proof. Proof that even when you're thrown out with nothing but a trash bag and a few dollars, you can still plant roots, you can still build something that lasts. That night, I framed one more thing in my office, the note they left me when they kicked me out. "You're on your own now, learn something from this." It hung beside my military commendations and my Chamber of Commerce award. Not because it defined me, but because it reminded me of how far I had come. They wanted me to learn something, and I did. I learned I didn't need their approval. I learned silence doesn't mean absence of strength, and I learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud or cruel. Sometimes, the best revenge is standing tall in the very place they swore you'd never reach. I walked back to the garden one last time before heading in for the night. The rose bush stood steady, its white blooms beginning to unfurl. My grandmother would have smiled at the sight. "Every spring is a chance to start over," she once told me. And she was right. I wasn't the spare anymore. I never was. I was the seed that survived, the one that grew roots where no one thought it could. And now, I had a home, a future, and a garden full of promises to prove it. In the end, what mattered wasn't whether my parents or my sister ever admitted what they did. What mattered was that I stopped carrying their lies as if they were mine. This wasn't just survival, it was taking back my own story. And maybe that's what makes this one of those family revenge stories people can't forget, the quiet kind of revenge where truth, resilience, and self-respect win. Because no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how twisted the family drama, sometimes the greatest revenge stories aren't about payback at all. They're about finally choosing yourself. If you've been drawn into this story and want more powerful family revenge stories, gripping revenge stories, and unforgettable family drama, make sure to hit subscribe. There's always another story worth telling and you won't want to miss it.